Well, good morning. I've spoken about this before, but not with the confidence that it deserved. Not because the theory is unsound or it doesn't apply to everything we've been talking about or it isn't transformational, important, yada, yada, yada. It was because of my lack of confidence. But in the last few days, I'll give you an example. There's a professor from the University of Toronto, John Vervaeke, and pardon me if I mispronounce. He's quite interesting. He's got a series going on right now. I think it's Voices with Vervaeke, Science, Spirituality, and the Meaning Crisis. And earlier in the week, he had an interview with Jules Evans, if I'm remembering. We called it Street Philosophy and Spirituality. Jules is interesting. He wrote a book called The Philosophy of Life and Other Dangerous Situations, The Art of Losing Control, a philosopher's search for ecstatic experience, and breaking open, finding a way through spiritual emergency. We've talked about these. Dark night of the soul. Trauma is what I'm well, it's my concentration right now. Why? Because I argue, I never thought of it till now. Rather than, I've talked about this, I translate dukkha, commonly translated as suffering, I translate it as dissatisfaction. Once I began to really understand Sanskrit and be able to translate for myself, I've actually translated dukkha as bad air. Du as bad, right? Du and sukha being good air. But of course, like it's an expression. So when you mention that to someone and go, "Oh, dukkha is good air," and they're like, "Yeah," open a dictionary and you'll see that that is what it means. The character, the term, the idea, the meaning is bad air. But the idea is, and this is what we're going to get to here, is free energy principle. The idea that it's only bad air because you're either not paying attention to what you should, you're ignoring reality of the situation, or you're trying to encourage a certain outcome. So the idea of bad air, if you're being driven by selfish goals or you're being delusional or selfish, sorry, I said selfish twice. The idea is if you're not being directed by the proper goal, you're not going to get the outcome you're looking for. So you're surrounded by dissatisfaction. From a Buddhist perspective, they go together. So remember that the three marks of existence is dukkha, anatta, anicca. So not self, meaning don't attach to the self. The self is just a tool that we use to go about, but also a tool for our liberation. But it's also our greatest barrier to the same. And impermanence. Impermanence teaches us both that the dissatisfaction in life flows from our attachment to things, our lack of belief in impermanence, but it's also the way to read what is not self, what is this idea of minimizing the self or the nature of self. I highly recommend you read the Satipatthana Sutra because you'll read the foundations of mindfulness, right? Your breath, you can follow the breath. It gives you a good variable but somewhat constant item to attach one's attention to, observe, and the observed. And next is the body, right? And the Satipatthana, which is just the way of mindfulness. Sati, to remember. The body is also in the jhanas, but here we're using it to not only meditate on, but we also use it to see into the nature of impermanence and equanimity. Because in the Satipatthana Sutra, it actually begins to talk about how, your skin and bone is no different than anyone else's or any other creatures, skin and bones. Now, the third one is my favorite, sampajana, sati sampajana. That's remember or to be mindful, to bring clear comprehension to all of life's daily activities. Clear comprehension. That's free energy. That's what we're going to talk about today. So there is a psychiatrist, Carl Friston. He's been, I'll explain. I found the free energy principle a little while back. I thought it was perfect. I thought it matched Yogacara thought of the nature of self. I thought it was a great way to understand the nature of self. Now, where the problem comes in is supposedly Carl Friston himself doesn't explain it all that well. I've gone and read it again, and I find it's pretty easily understood. The way I always explained it was the mind or the physical somatic piece is the predictive engine. So I'm going to read a little bit more of free energy, but it's a predictive engine. The self is there to help the predictive engine to produce better predictions, right? We want to minimize our surprise. The self is also there to inform the predictive engine as to our actual sensory experience, what's going on in the world. Now, there's theories come where this disconnect might happen. We're either not in the present, so we're not even experiencing, or we're not paying attention to the right stuff. It's a wonderful way to see it. So the reason why we've gotten back to this is after that excellent discussion with Jules Evans, and he talks about, and this is what I wholly believe in, bringing philosophy back into popular culture as a cultivation of wisdom in the search for meaning in life. I've always felt that because having been taught French early on, I understand that philosophy, philosophe, is just simply the love of wisdom. So here we have Carl Friston. He said that his love began with a 1920 book, Space, Time, and Gravitation by, pardon my memory, is absolutely atrocious, and I'll never find the gentleman's name because it just... Eddington. He wrote about relativity. So I'm just going to read the conclusions of a paper from Cambridge that was written about the free energy principle. It's written by a psychoanalyst, so you'll understand his particular bent, but I don't think he's wrong. In fact, I think I've even mentioned in previous podcasts that the talking cure, because of my trauma research, is back in vogue. And so is this. And I guess we're seeing me develop my own protocol for healing trauma, not based on anything except taking what works from any one little system and applying it, as we all should, personally. So the conclusions, and I'm going to read the beginning, but I'm going to read the conclusions first to get an idea of why I'm pretty chuffed about this. So if rehabilitation of the psychoanalytic method in the light of the FEP, free energy principle, comes as a pleasant surprise, it is consistent with its principle. As in Mark Twain's trope, rumors of psychoanalysis' death have been greatly exaggerated. In place of despair, disappearance, the FEP suggests that repair is possible. FEP-grounded psychoanalytic approaches such as MBT, that's mindfulness-based therapies, are now known to help those with profound mental distress. They also suggest a scientifically sound account of the interpersonal and neuronal mechanisms by which psychological change comes about. Oh, my apologies. What we can see there is how a psychoanalyst simplifies the free energy principle, that it's simply us trying to accord The neuronal mechanism is trying to accord what we expect with our actual outcomes. Right, so let's jump to the top of this page because it actually is not too bad. The summary of Friston's free energy principle, the new life for psychoanalysis? Question mark. This was just submitted to the Department of Psychology, University of Exeter. No, well, it's published at Cambridge. Neither here nor there. The summary is as follows. The free energy principle, FEP, is a new paradigm that has gained widespread interest in the neuroscience community. Although its principal architect, Carl Friston, is a psychiatrist, it has thus far had little impact within psychiatry. This article introduced readers to the FEP, points out its consilience with Freud's neuroscientific ideas and the psychodynamic practice, and suggests ways in which the FEP can help explain the mechanisms of action of the psychotherapies. As I said, it's funny for me because he wrote this, I think, going back as far as 2007. And as I said, I've heard different stories as to why it's not more mainstream, more popular. I've heard reasons that it's too difficult to understand and all these different ideas. So free energy. Let's see here. So this is a different article. This is from Frontiers in Psychology, Free Energy Minimization and the Darkroom Problem. I actually liked how this guy explained it because what he did, this is by Carl Friston, Christopher Thornton, and Andy Clark. The Wellcome Trust Center for Neuroimaging, the University College of London. That's where Carl Friston is. I believe the Wellcome Trust Center is his own center. The Informatics, University of Sussex in Brighton, the UK, and the School of Philosophy, Psychology, and Language Sciences, the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. So he says, recent years have seen the emergence of an important new fundamental theory of brain function. This theory brings information theoretic, Bayesian, neuroscientific, and machine learning approaches into a single framework whose overarching principle is the minimization of surprise, or equivalently, the minimization of expectation. I like that he added that. That is so true. So the idea is to predict our environment based on, the data and a certain amount of algorithm that we could call educated guessing, intuition. But at the same time, the minimization of expectation. I love that because if we think about it, that's where I'm coming from. Trauma is an expectation, a constant, ever overarching cloud of expectation. And it goes on. The most comprehensive of such treatment is the free energy minimization. Carl Friston. Yeah, 2007. Updated again in 2010. So not that old. A recurrent puzzle raised by critics of these models is that biological systems do not seem to avoid surprises. We do not seek a dark, unchanging chamber and stay there. This is the darkroom problem. Here we describe the problem and further unpack the issues to which it speaks. Using the same format as Eddington's space-time and gravitation, we present our discussion as a conversation between an information theorist, Thornton, a physicist, Friston, and a philosopher, Clark. Oh, he's a physicist. So it goes on and they talk and they go back and forth. And they just talk about the free energy principle. And what do they talk about? It's exactly what I said. They just talk about that. It's an excellent way to get into how we can understand not only why we have so much trouble with expectations, surprise, and the issues surrounding the self. What's interesting is, as I said, John Vervaeke, in his ongoing series, had an interview with a gentleman by the name of Mark Miller. Mark Miller is, again, in this. Let's see, Marx distinguished between a pathological version, as in depersonalization and self-transcendence, that can be conducive to the cultivation of meaning. Okay, so he, Mark has made use of that as well. Well, anyways, Mark Miller believes initially he was wondering whether the experience of depersonalization and derealization, this can't remember what he called it, but he's trying to see the nature and function of the self. So he was wondering if the Buddhist concept of not self was similar to this depersonalization, derealization. And coming from someone who's experienced, I got to say that it is a diametric opposite to the actual liberation of self, because it's not a minimization of like self in a depersonalization. It's a minimization of um, the uh, the importance, the absolute importance of self. It's what we've talked about, the equanimity, uh, that I am no different than, right? We were talking about this earlier, the idea that my bone and skin and flesh is no different than the bone and skin and flesh of the animals that I would say some of us eat. So the idea here, they kind of mentioned free energy, and in their discussion, it is quite a pithy discussion, but at the same time, there was a lot of padding. There was room for some real deep discussion. But I think the reason here is I don't know if these two gentlemen have discussed before. By the way, Mark Miller is in AI and cognitive science, something like that. He's over in Japan right now working on this sort of stuff. So they said that they were going to, set up another talk. And I certainly hope so, because I highly recommend this series. I think it's wonderful, especially if you do your own research into. I mean, that's what I love. Like when you go and look at that paper on the free energy minimization, right? Free energy is the surprise. When you look at the reference to these papers, you find all sorts of great articles and books to read. So on that, I'm going to leave it. Just wrap it up with I can't add much to it as a Yogacaran. That's exactly the way the Yogacarans see it. The idea of mind-only school isn't that nothing else exists. It's that our relation to the universe and ourselves happen all within the mind. So our perceptions and our outcomes are wholly managed by oneself. So on that, let's see if I can find podcast app and end for the day.